In the grand halls of Astoria Palace, where protocol rules supreme and bloodlines determine destiny, one moment of defiance would shake the very foundations of royal tradition. When Duchess Margot's jealousy crossed the line from petty rivalry to dangerous assault, she never expected a lowly royal guard to become the catalyst that would change everything. What happened next would be whispered about in royal circles for generations, a story of courage, honor, and the day a commoner taught nobility the true meaning of respect. Part 1. The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble floors of Astoria Palace as Captain Marcus Hartwell adjusted his ceremonial sword and prepared for another day of royal duties. 23 years of service to the crown had taught him many things, but the most important lesson was this: in the world of royalty, appearances mattered more than truth, and silence was often more valuable than gold. The palace buzzed with its usual morning activity. Servants scurried through corridors carrying silver trays, their footsteps muffled by centuries-old Persian rugs. Ministers in dark suits whispered urgent matters of state in alcoves, while ladies-in-waiting gossiped behind painted fans. At the center of it all stood the towering figure of Marcus, his steel-gray uniform immaculate, his weathered face betraying nothing of the storm brewing in his mind. Today was Princess Isabella's 16th birthday, a milestone that would officially introduce her to royal society. The palace had been preparing for weeks. Florists had transformed the grand ballroom into a garden paradise, chefs had crafted delicacies that would make kings weep, and seamstresses had worked through countless nights to create gowns worthy of fairy tales. Marcus had watched Princess Isabella grow from a shy child hiding behind her mother's skirts to a poised young woman who carried herself with natural grace. Unlike many of the nobility he'd served, Isabella possessed something rare in royal circles: genuine kindness. She remembered the names of servants, asked about their families, and never demanded anything she could ask for politely. The same could not be said for Duchess Margot Blackwood. Duchess Margot was Queen Catherine's younger sister, a woman who had spent 43 years believing that her royal blood entitled her to whatever she desired. Where Isabella was graceful, Margot was demanding. Where Isabella was kind, Margot was cruel. Where Isabella earned respect through her actions, Margot demanded it through her birthright. The rivalry between aunt and niece had simmered for years, but recently it had begun to boil over. Margot watched with growing resentment as Isabella's star rose higher with each public appearance. The people loved their young princess, and that love translated into influence that Margot believed should be hers. As Marcus made his rounds through the palace, he noticed the tension crackling through the air like electricity before a storm. Servants whispered nervously in corners, their eyes darting toward the Duchess's chambers. Even the usually unflappable butler, Mr. Pemberton, seemed on edge as he barked orders at the household staff. "Captain Hartwell," came a voice from behind him. Marcus turned to see Lady Victoria Ashford, Isabella's personal lady-in-waiting and closest confidant. Victoria was 22, intelligent beyond her years, and one of the few people in the palace who dared to speak truth to power. "Lady Victoria," Marcus nodded respectfully. "How may I serve you?" "The princess requests your presence in the Rose Garden. She wishes to review security arrangements for tonight's celebration." Marcus found Isabella exactly where he expected, sitting on a marble bench beside the fountain, feeding breadcrumbs to a family of ducks that had taken up residence in the palace gardens. She wore a simple blue dress that complemented her dark hair, and her face lit up with a genuine smile when she saw him approaching. "Captain Hartwell," she called, rising gracefully to her feet. "Thank you for coming so quickly." "Your Royal Highness," Marcus bowed deeply. "I understand you have concerns about tonight's security?" Isabella's expression grew serious. "Not concerns, exactly. But I wanted to discuss something with you privately." She glanced around to ensure they were alone, then continued in a lower voice. "I'm worried about Aunt Margot. Her behavior has become unpredictable." Marcus had noticed the same thing. In recent weeks, Duchess Margot had grown increasingly erratic. She had publicly criticized Isabella's charitable work, questioned her fitness for royal duties, and made several cutting remarks about the princess's common interests in literature and art. "Has the Duchess done anything specific to concern you, Your Highness?" Isabella hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Yesterday, she cornered me in the library. She said that tonight's celebration was premature, that I wasn't ready for the responsibilities of royal society. When I tried to leave, she Isabella paused, touching her arm unconsciously. She grabbed me quite roughly. I'm afraid she might try something tonight. Marcus felt a cold anger settle in his chest. Laying hands on a member of the royal family, especially the heir apparent, was not just inappropriate, it was treasonous. But he also knew that accusing a duchess based solely on the word of a 16-year-old princess, even one he trusted completely, would require careful handling. Has anyone else witnessed the duchess's behavior? Lady Victoria saw the library incident, but I asked her not to speak of it. I hoped it was an isolated moment of frustration. Isabella's voice grew smaller. But this morning, I overheard her speaking with Lord Blackwood about putting me in my place tonight. I don't think she intends to let my birthday pass peacefully. Marcus studied the young princess's face. Despite her youth, Isabella possessed an wisdom that came from growing up in the treacherous waters of court politics. If she was concerned enough to seek him out privately, the threat was real. Your Highness, I want you to know that you have my complete protection. Tonight and always. He straightened to his full height, every inch the seasoned soldier. But I also need you to promise me something. Of course, Captain. If the Duchess approaches you tonight, do not be alone with her. Stay in public areas, surrounded by witnesses. And, if she attempts to lay hands on you again. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. You have my permission to defend yourself, regardless of protocol. Isabella nodded, understanding the gravity of what he was telling her. In the rigid hierarchy of royal society, a princess defending herself against a duchess would cause an enormous scandal. But Marcus was essentially giving her official backing for such an action. As the afternoon wore on, Marcus found himself increasingly on edge. He doubled the guard rotations, personally inspected every entrance to the ballroom, and briefed his most trusted sergeants on potential trouble spots. He also made a point of observing Duchess Margot's preparations for the evening. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The Duchess had chosen to wear a gown of deep purple, the same shade traditionally reserved for the reigning monarch. Her jewelry was ostentatious even by royal standards, featuring the famous Blackwood sapphires that hadn't been seen in public for decades. Most telling of all, she had arranged for a special entrance to the ballroom, one that would allow her to make a grand appearance after the princess had already begun receiving guests. Marcus recognized the signs. Duchess Margot wasn't simply planning to attend her niece's birthday celebration, she was planning to upstage it. As evening approached and the first guests began arriving, Marcus took his position near the ballroom's main entrance. He watched as nobility from across the kingdom filed in, their elaborate gowns and ceremonial uniforms creating a rainbow of silk and satin. Ministers and ambassadors, duchesses and earls, all come to pay their respects to the future queen. Princess Isabella made her entrance precisely at 8 o'clock, descending the grand staircase in a gown of ivory silk that seemed to capture and reflect every candle in the chandeliers above. The crowd fell silent as she moved with perfect grace across the ballroom floor, accepting congratulations and well wishes with the poise of someone born to rule. For nearly an hour, the celebration proceeded flawlessly. Isabella danced with appropriate partners, charmed foreign dignitaries with her intelligence and wit, and generally conducted herself with the dignity befitting her station. Marcus began to hope that his concerns had been unfounded, that perhaps Duchess Margot would content herself with simply attending the party without incident. He should have known better. At 9:30, just as the evening's formal presentations were concluding, the ballroom's side entrance burst open with theatrical flourish. Duchess Margot swept into the room as if she were the guest of honor, her purple gown trailing behind her like a royal banner. The Blackwood sapphires caught the light and threw it back in brilliant flashes of blue fire. The effect was immediate and devastating. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Dancers froze in place. Every eye in the room turned toward the Duchess as she made her grand entrance, effectively stealing the spotlight from the birthday princess. Marcus watched Isabella's face carefully. For just a moment, he saw a flash of hurt and anger cross her features. But then, with remarkable composure for someone so young, she straightened her shoulders and continued her conversation with the Venetian ambassador as if nothing had happened. The Duchess, however, was just getting started. Margot moved through the crowd like a storm front, accepting the bows and curtsies that were her due as a duchess, but clearly expecting something more. When she reached the area near Isabella, she positioned herself so that guests approaching the princess would have to acknowledge her first. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The Duchess was systematically undermining Isabella's position as the evening's honored guest, and there was nothing he could do about it without overstepping his authority. Palace protocol was clear: guards did not interfere in matters of royal precedence unless there was a direct physical threat. The situation continued to escalate as the evening wore on. Duchess Margot inserted herself into Isabella's conversations, corrected the princess's responses to guests' questions, and generally behaved as if she, not Isabella, were the rightful center of attention. Marcus could see the strain beginning to show on Isabella's face, but the young princess maintained her composure admirably. She deflected her aunt's interruptions with diplomatic skill, continued to engage warmly with her guests, and refused to let the Duchess's behavior ruin her special evening. But Marcus knew Duchess Margot well enough to recognize that this was merely the opening act. The real confrontation was yet to come. As the clock struck 11, the time arrived for the evening's final ceremony, the presentation of the royal seal of maturity, a symbolic passing of certain royal privileges from the monarch to the heir. It was a moment that would officially recognize Isabella as an adult member of the royal family, with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. King Edmund took his place at the front of the ballroom, holding the ancient golden seal that had been used in such ceremonies for over 400 years. Queen Catherine stood beside him, beaming with maternal pride as Isabella approached the makeshift dais. The assembled crowd fell silent in anticipation of this historic moment. Ambassadors leaned forward in their chairs. Ministers straightened their formal uniforms. Ladies-in-waiting craned their necks for the best view. And Duchess Margot stepped directly into Isabella's path. "Wait," the Duchess declared, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom. "Before we proceed with this ceremony, I believe there are some matters that need to be addressed." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. King Edmund's face darkened with anger, while Queen Catherine looked as if she might faint. Isabella stood frozen, clearly uncertain how to respond to such an unprecedented breach of protocol. Marcus felt every muscle in his body tense. This was it, the moment he had been dreading all evening. Duchess Margot had finally crossed the line from inappropriate behavior to open rebellion against royal protocol. "Sister," Queen Catherine said, her voice tight with controlled fury, "this is neither the time nor the place for whatever grievances you may harbor." "Isn't it?" Duchess Margot turned to face the crowd, her voice rising to ensure everyone could hear. "We're about to grant adult privileges to someone who has shown herself to be immature, impulsive, and unfit for royal responsibilities. Someone who consorts with commoners, who questions centuries of royal tradition, who believes that charity work is more important than proper royal duties." The accusations hung in the air like poison. Isabella's face had gone pale, but her chin lifted defiantly. Marcus could see her struggling to maintain her composure in the face of such a public humiliation. Furthermore, Duchess Margot continued, warming to her theme, "I have witnessed this princess showing disrespect to her elders, ignoring proper protocol, and generally conducting herself in a manner unbefitting her station." It was a masterful political attack, designed to plant seeds of doubt about Isabella's fitness to rule. Worse, it was being delivered in front of the most influential people in the kingdom, ensuring that rumors and speculation would spread far beyond the palace walls. King Edmund stepped forward, his face a mask of royal fury. "Duchess Margot, you will cease this behavior immediately and withdraw from me now." Isabella's voice rang out clearly, cutting through her grandfather's words. The princess stepped forward, her bearing proud and regal despite her youth. "If my aunt has accusations to make, let her make them openly. I will not have my character assassinated through whispers and insinuations." Marcus felt a surge of pride at the young princess's courage, but also a growing sense of dread. Isabella was walking directly into Duchess Margot's trap, and there would be no easy way out. The Duchess smiled, a cold expression that never reached her eyes. "Very well, niece. Since you insist on public confrontation rather than private correction." She moved closer to Isabella, invading the princess's personal space in a way that made several guests shift uncomfortably. "You embarrass this family with your common interests. You diminish royal dignity with your charitable work among the peasants. You question traditions that have served this kingdom for centuries. With each accusation, Duchess Margot stepped closer, until she was standing directly in front of Isabella, her face mere inches away from her niece's. The physical intimidation was obvious to everyone in the room, but still within the bounds of what might be considered acceptable behavior between family members. And, most importantly, the Duchess continued, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the silent ballroom, "You have forgotten your place in the natural order of things." What happened next would be burned into Marcus's memory for the rest of his life. Duchess Margot reached out and placed her hand on Isabella's shoulder, not gently, not in a familial gesture, but with the clear intent to force the princess to step back, to physically demonstrate her dominance over her younger niece. Isabella, to her credit, didn't immediately give ground. She stood her ground, meeting her aunt's gaze with steady determination. That's when Duchess Margot's grip tightened and she pushed. It wasn't a violent shove, but it was unmistakably an assault. The princess stumbled backward, her elaborate gown nearly causing her to lose her balance entirely. Only her natural grace and years of deportment training prevented her from falling in front of the entire royal court. The ballroom erupted in shocked gasps and angry murmurs. Several of the younger nobles started forward as if to intervene, while older, more experienced courtiers looked around uncertainly, unsure of the proper protocol for such an unprecedented situation. Marcus didn't hesitate. 23 years of military training took over as he strode across the ballroom floor, his ceremonial sword clinking softly against his leg with each determined step. The crowd parted before him like the Red Sea, sensing the controlled fury in his movement. "Duchess," he said, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of someone who had commanded soldiers in battle. "Step away from Her Royal Highness immediately." Duchess Margot turned toward him with surprise and disdain. "You forget yourself, Captain. This is a family matter, not a security concern. The moment you laid hands on the princess, it became a security concern." Marcus positioned himself between Isabella and her aunt, his entire body radiating protective menace. "And I suggest you remember that assault upon a member of the royal family is treason, regardless of your own bloodline." The word treason sent another ripple of shock through the assembled crowd. Duchess Margot's face went pale as she realized the gravity of what Marcus had just accused her of and the public nature of that accusation. "How dare you speak to me in such a manner?" she sputtered. "I am a duchess of this realm. You are nothing but a common soldier." "I am a captain of the royal guard," Marcus replied evenly, "and I am sworn to protect every member of the royal family from harm. That includes protecting them from other members of the royal family when necessary." The confrontation had reached a point of no return. Every person in the ballroom understood that they were witnessing something unprecedented in royal history, a commoner directly challenging a duchess in defense of royal protocol. But Marcus wasn't finished yet. Part 2. The silence that followed Marcus's declaration stretched like a taut wire across the ornate ballroom. 500 of the kingdom's most powerful people held their collective breath, waiting to see how this unprecedented confrontation would resolve itself. Chandeliers cast dancing shadows across faces frozen in shock, while the scent of expensive perfume and political tension filled the air. Princess Isabella stood behind Marcus, her face a careful mask of royal composure despite the tremor in her hands. She had never seen anyone, noble or commoner, speak to Duchess Margot with such direct authority. The protective stance of the royal guard captain both comforted and terrified her, because she understood the implications of what was happening better than most. Duchess Margot's face cycled through several shades of red as she processed the captain's words. Never in her 43 years had a person of common birth dared to challenge her authority so directly, especially not in front of the most important people in the kingdom. The humiliation was almost unbearable, but worse than that was the growing realization that Marcus might actually have the legal authority to back up his words. "You speak of treason," she hissed, her voice barely controlled, "but the real treason here is a common-born soldier daring to threaten a duchess. Do you have any idea what the penalties are for such insubordination?" Marcus didn't move from his protective position, but his response carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I'm well aware of military law, Your Grace. I'm also well aware that my oath to protect the royal family supersedes all other considerations, including respect for noble rank when that nobility threatens the crown." King Edmund, who had been momentarily stunned into silence by the rapid escalation of events, finally found his voice. Captain Hartwell, while we appreciate your dedication to royal security, perhaps this matter can be resolved through more diplomatic channels." It was a gentle reproof, but Marcus could hear the uncertainty in the king's voice. Edmund was caught between his duty to support royal protocol, his natural inclination to protect his granddaughter, and his awareness that hundreds of foreign dignitaries were watching the royal family tear itself apart in public. "With respect, Your Majesty," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off Duchess Margot, "diplomacy becomes ineffective the moment physical assault enters the equation. The security of the royal family cannot be negotiated." The word assault sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. Several foreign ambassadors leaned toward their aides, speaking in urgent undertones about the political implications of what they were witnessing. The Venetian ambassador, who had been conversing with Isabella just moments before, looked particularly troubled as he undoubtedly calculated how this scandal might affect trade negotiations. Lady Victoria Ashford, who had been watching from the edge of the crowd, stepped forward with remarkable courage for someone so young. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and steady, "if I may speak as a witness to recent events." "You may not," Duchess Margot snapped, turning her fury toward the lady-in-waiting. "You are a child, and your testimony is worth nothing." "On the contrary," Marcus interjected, "Lady Victoria's testimony as a peer witness would carry considerable weight in any formal inquiry. As would the testimony of the 300 people who just witnessed you assault Princess Isabella." The captain's words were carefully chosen to remind everyone present that they were not simply observers of royal drama, but potential witnesses in a legal proceeding. The implication was clear: this was not merely a family dispute that could be quietly swept under the palace carpets. Queen Catherine, who had been silent throughout the confrontation, finally stepped forward. Her face was pale but determined as she addressed her sister directly. "Margot, you have gone too far. Your behavior tonight has been completely unacceptable, and I think it would be best if you withdrew from the celebration." "Withdrew?" Duchess Margot's voice rose to a near shriek. "You want me to slink away like a scolded child because a commoner soldier has decided to play at being a nobleman? I want you to remember your dignity and remove yourself before this situation becomes any worse," Catherine replied with steel in her voice that reminded everyone present why she had been chosen as queen. But Duchess Margot was beyond reason now. The combination of public humiliation, wounded pride, and years of festering resentment had pushed her past the point of rational behavior. Instead of gracefully accepting the offered exit, she doubled down on her aggressive stance. "I will not be dismissed by palace servants and children," she declared, taking a step toward Isabella that immediately brought her back into conflict with Marcus. "This princess needs to learn proper respect for her elders, and if her parents won't teach her, then I will." Marcus shifted slightly, placing himself more directly in the Duchess's path. "Your Grace, I strongly advise you to reconsider your next actions." "Are you threatening me, Captain?" "I'm warning you. There's a significant difference." The distinction was important, and everyone in the ballroom understood it. A threat from a commoner to a duchess would be grounds for immediate arrest and execution. A warning from a royal guard captain about the consequences of assaulting a member of the royal family, however, was entirely within his authority and duty. Duchess Margot seemed to sense that she was losing control of the situation, but, rather than retreating, she decided to escalate further. "You speak of assault," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the silent ballroom, "but I see only a concerned aunt trying to provide guidance to a wayward niece. If that constitutes assault in your common mind, then perhaps your understanding of noble behavior is too limited for your current position." It was a masterful political maneuver, designed to reframe the physical contact as normal family interaction while simultaneously attacking Marcus's credibility and social standing. In normal circumstances, it might have been effective. But Princess Isabella chose that moment to step out from behind her protector. "Enough," she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised even those who knew her well. "I will not stand here and listen to Captain Hartwell's honor questioned by someone who has just committed assault in front of 300 witnesses." The princess's words sent a shock through the crowd. By directly confirming that she considered her aunt's actions to be assault, Isabella had formally escalated the situation from a family dispute to a matter of criminal law. Furthermore, Isabella continued, her chin raised in defiant pride, I will not tolerate anyone regardless of their noble blood, suggesting that Captain Hartwell lacks the understanding or authority to fulfill his duties. He has served this crown with distinction for over 2 decades, and his loyalty and competence are beyond question. The public endorsement of a common-born soldier by a princess was unprecedented in royal protocol, but Isabella wasn't finished. If my aunt believes that blood alone determines worth, then she has learned nothing from the history of our kingdom. The crown serves the people, not the other way around, and those who serve the crown faithfully regardless of their birth deserve our respect and protection. It was a radical statement, one that challenged centuries of accepted hierarchy and noble privilege. The foreign ambassadors and attendants began taking notes furiously, understanding that they were witnessing a potential shift in the kingdom's social order. Duchess Margot's face had gone from red to white to red again. You dare lecture me about royal responsibility? You, who spend your time with commoners and peasants, who question the natural order that has made our kingdom great? Yes, Isabella replied simply. I do dare. Because someone needs to remind you that nobility is not a license for cruelty, and royal blood is not an excuse for dishonor. The princess's words hung in the air like a battle standard, a clear challenge to everything Duchess Margot represented. The older woman stood frozen for a moment, apparently struggling to process the fact that her 16-year-old niece had just publicly dressed her down in front of the most important people in the kingdom. Then, with a suddenness that caught everyone off guard, Duchess Margot lunged forward. Her intention was unclear, perhaps she meant to slap Isabella, or grab her arm again, or simply get close enough to deliver a more personal threat. But, her movement was aggressive and directed toward the princess, which was all Marcus needed to see. 23 years of military reflexes took over. Marcus stepped forward and, to the side, intercepting the Duchess's advance while simultaneously placing his hand on the hilt of his ceremonial sword. The movement was smooth, professional, and absolutely unmistakable in its implications. Stop where you are, Your Grace, he commanded, his voice carrying the full authority of someone who had spent decades commanding soldiers in life-and-death situations. Duchess Margot found herself face-to-face with 6 feet and 2 inches of seasoned military officer whose hand rested casually on a blade that, while ceremonial, was nevertheless quite real and quite sharp. The reality of her situation seemed to penetrate her fury for the first time that evening. You would draw steel against a duchess, she whispered, her voice suddenly much smaller than before. I would draw steel to protect any member of the royal family from assault, Marcus replied evenly. Your noble birth grants you many privileges, Your Grace, but immunity from the consequences of violence is not among them. The ballroom had become so quiet that the sound of silk rustling against silk seemed thunderous. Everyone present understood that they were witnessing a moment that would be discussed and analyzed for years to come. A commoner had not only challenged a duchess, but had done so with the implicit backing of royal authority. King Edmund finally stepped forward, his face grave with the weight of royal judgment. Duchess Margot, he said, his voice carrying the full dignity of the crown, you have conducted yourself in a manner unbecoming of your station and harmful to the dignity of this celebration. We command you to withdraw immediately. It was phrased as a royal command, not a request, and the implications were clear to everyone present. Duchess Margot could obey gracefully, or she could be removed by force. There were no other options. For a moment, it seemed as though the Duchess might continue to resist. Her eyes darted around the ballroom, perhaps looking for supporters among the noble guests. But the faces that looked back at her showed only shock, disappointment, and, in some cases, clear disapproval of her behavior. This is not over, she said finally, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. This insult will not be forgotten or forgiven. Neither will yours, Princess Isabella replied quietly, but her words carried clearly in the silent ballroom. Duchess Margot swept toward the ballroom's main entrance, her purple gown trailing behind her like a royal banner in retreat. The crowd parted silently before her, but Marcus noticed that many of the nobles avoided meeting her gaze. The Duchess had not simply lost this particular battle, she had damaged her standing with the very people whose support she needed to maintain her position in court. As the ballroom doors closed behind Duchess Margot, the tension in the room didn't dissipate so much as transform into something different. The immediate crisis was over, but everyone present understood that they had witnessed something historically significant. King Edmund looked around the ballroom at his assembled guests, then nodded toward the musicians who had been frozen in place throughout the confrontation. Please, he said, his voice carrying just a hint of weariness, continue with the evening's festivities. But, before the music could resume, Princess Isabella stepped forward. Your Majesty, she said, her voice strong and clear, before we continue with the celebration, I believe there is something that needs to be addressed publicly. Edmund frowned slightly, clearly hoping that the evening's drama had concluded. What is it, my dear? Isabella turned to face Marcus, who still stood at attention nearby. Captain Hartwell has served this crown faithfully for 23 years. Tonight, he has once again demonstrated his unwavering commitment to protecting the royal family, even when doing so required challenging someone of noble birth. She paused, looking around the ballroom to ensure she had everyone's attention. In recognition of his service, his courage, and his absolute dedication to duty, I believe he deserves more than our private gratitude. Without warning, Princess Isabella sank into a deep, formal curtsy, the kind normally reserved for greeting foreign monarchs or acknowledging the highest nobles of the realm. The effect on the ballroom was electric. Gasps echoed from every corner as 300 of the kingdom's most powerful people watched a princess formally salute a common-born soldier. It was unprecedented, revolutionary, and absolutely unmistakable in its message. Marcus stood frozen, clearly unprepared for such a public honor. His face showed a mixture of pride, embarrassment, and something that might have been tears as he processed what the princess had just done. Your Royal Highness, he said finally, his voice rough with emotion, you honor me far beyond my deserving. No, Captain, Isabella replied as she rose gracefully from her curtsy, I honor you exactly as much as you deserve. And, I want everyone in this kingdom to understand that true nobility comes from actions, not bloodlines. The silence that followed was different from the tense quiet that had dominated the ballroom during the confrontation with Duchess Margot. This was the silence of people processing a fundamental shift in their understanding of how the world worked. Then, slowly, something unprecedented began to happen. Lord Chancellor Pemberton, the highest-ranking noble official in the kingdom, stepped forward and bowed formally to Marcus. The bow wasn't as deep as Isabella's curtsy, but it was unmistakably respectful, a clear acknowledgement of the captain's service and courage. One by one, other nobles began to follow suit. Some offered formal bows, others simple nods of respect, but the message was clear. Princess Isabella's public salute had given them permission to acknowledge what they had all witnessed, that a common-born man had shown more honor and courage than a duchess. Marcus stood at attention throughout it all, his military bearing never wavering, but those who knew him well could see the emotion in his eyes. After decades of faithful service in the shadows, he was finally receiving the recognition he had earned 100 times over. When the last of the nobles had paid their respects, King Edmund stepped forward. His face showed a mixture of pride in his granddaughter and something that might have been regret for the years it had taken for Marcus to receive such acknowledgement. Captain Hartwell, the king said formally, your service to the crown has been exemplary, and your courage tonight has been exceptional. We are proud to have you in our service. Marcus bowed deeply. Your Majesty, I serve at the pleasure of the crown and the honor of the kingdom. And serve while you have, Edmund replied. Then, in a voice that carried to every corner of the ballroom, he added, let it be recorded in the official chronicles that on this night, Princess Isabella's 16th birthday, Captain Marcus Hartwell of the Royal Guard demonstrated the highest ideals of service, courage, and honor in defense of the royal family. It was more than a compliment, it was a formal recognition that would become part of the historical record, ensuring that Marcus's actions would be remembered long after everyone present was gone. As the king's words faded, the musicians finally began to play again, but the mood in the ballroom had fundamentally changed. Conversations buzzed with excitement and speculation about what they had witnessed. Foreign ambassadors clustered together, discussing the implications for their diplomatic relationships. Young nobles looked at the royal guard with new respect, while older courtiers reassessed their assumptions about social hierarchy. But, perhaps the most significant change was in Princess Isabella herself. The shy, uncertain girl who had entered the ballroom that evening was gone, replaced by a young woman who had faced down a duchess, defended her protector, and publicly challenged centuries of social tradition. She moved through the crowd now with new confidence, engaging with guests who looked at her with fresh respect and, perhaps a touch of awe. Marcus resumed his position near the ballroom entrance, but his role had fundamentally changed. He was no longer just a guard providing security, he was a symbol of the new order that Princess Isabella represented, a living reminder that honor and courage could come from any station in life. As the evening continued, the captain found himself thinking about the conversation he would need to have with his sergeants tomorrow. Tonight's events would ripple through the palace and, beyond, changing relationships and expectations in ways that would take years to fully understand. But, for now, he was content to stand watch over a princess who had shown more courage than many seasoned warriors, in a kingdom that was slowly learning that true nobility came from character rather than bloodline. The celebration continued well into the night, but everyone present understood that they had witnessed more than a birthday party. They had seen the birth of a new era, one where respect would be earned rather than inherited, and where even a common-born guard could stand as tall as any duke when honor demanded it. And, in the quiet moments between songs, when the dancing paused and conversations lulled, Marcus could still see Princess Isabella's curtsy in his mind, a gesture that had changed everything with its simple recognition that courage deserved honor, regardless of its source. Part 3. The morning after Princess Isabella's birthday celebration dawned gray and drizzly, matching the somber mood that had settled over Astoria Palace like a heavy blanket. Word of the previous night's confrontation had spread through the kingdom's nobility faster than wildfire, carried by servants, ambassadors, and guests who had witnessed the unprecedented clash between Duchess Margot and Captain Marcus Hartwell. Marcus stood at his usual post outside the royal dining hall, but everything felt different now. Servants who had previously hurried past with barely a nod now offered respectful greetings. Young pages looked at him with something approaching hero worship, while veteran guards sought him out to express their pride in his actions. The recognition was gratifying, but it also brought a weight of responsibility that the captain hadn't fully anticipated. Inside the dining hall, the royal family was conducting their own post-mortem of the evening's events. King Edmund sat at the head of the table, his usually robust appetite apparently diminished as he pushed eggs around his plate without eating them. Queen Catherine looked as though she hadn't slept, her eyes red-rimmed and her usually perfect composure showing cracks of strain. Princess Isabella, however, appeared remarkably composed for someone who had been at the center of such a dramatic confrontation. She ate her breakfast with apparent calm, occasionally glancing toward the windows where rain streaked the diamond-paned glass. "The Chancellor of Venezia has requested an urgent meeting," King Edmund said finally, breaking the uncomfortable silence. Apparently, his ambassador was quite impressed by last night's proceedings. "Impressed is one word for it," Queen Catherine replied wearily. The ambassador of Francia looked positively scandalized when Princess Isabella curtsied to a commoner. "I suspect we'll be receiving some very pointed diplomatic correspondence in the coming days." Isabella set down her silver fork with deliberate precision. "I regret that my actions may have caused diplomatic complications," she said carefully, "but I do not regret the actions themselves." Her grandfather studied her face intently. "You understand that what you did last night will have consequences far beyond this palace? That nobles throughout the kingdom will see it as a challenge to the established order?" "I understand perfectly, grandfather. But I also understand that established orders sometimes need to be challenged, especially when they allow cruelty to flourish under the protection of noble blood." King Edmund leaned back in his chair, and, for a moment, the weight of his 72 years seemed to settle heavily on his shoulders. "You sound remarkably like your grandmother," he said quietly. "She had that same fierce sense of justice, that same willingness to stand against tradition when she believed it was wrong." "Is that why you married her?" Isabella asked with a small smile. "Among other reasons," Edmund replied, his expression softening slightly. "Though I must admit, she caused considerably fewer diplomatic incidents during our courtship." The attempted levity fell somewhat flat, as all three family members were acutely aware of the storm that was building around them. Already, urgent messages were arriving from noble houses throughout the kingdom, some offering support but many demanding explanations for the unprecedented events of the previous evening. A soft knock at the dining room door interrupted their conversation. Lord Chancellor Pemberton entered with his usual dignity, but Marcus, observing from his position in the corridor, could see the stress lines around the older man's eyes. "Your Majesty," Pemberton said with a formal bow, "I'm afraid we have several urgent matters requiring your attention. The Duchess Margot has formally requested an audience, and several noble houses have sent representatives demanding clarification of last night's events." King Edmund sighed deeply. "Very well. Schedule the Duchess for this afternoon, and arrange meetings with the noble representatives throughout the morning." He paused, then added, "And send word to Captain Hartwell that I would like to speak with him privately before any of these meetings take place." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. Being summoned for a private audience with the king was either a very good sign or a very bad one, and, after the previous night's unprecedented events, it could easily be either. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself in the king's private study, a comfortable room lined with books and military memorabilia from Edmund's younger days as a career officer. The king sat behind a massive oak desk, but he gestured for Marcus to take one of the leather chairs normally reserved for visiting dignitaries. 23 years of service, Edmund began without preamble, and, in all that time, I don't believe you've ever given me cause for concern. Until last night. Marcus straightened in his chair. Your Majesty, if my actions were inappropriate, were they? Edmund interrupted. That's what I'm trying to determine. You publicly challenged a duchess, threatened to draw steel against her, and encouraged a princess to salute you in front of 300 witnesses. By any traditional measure, your behavior was completely unacceptable. The king paused, studying Marcus's face intently. And, yet, every instinct I possess tells me that you acted exactly as you should have. Help me understand that contradiction. Marcus chose his words carefully. Your Majesty, my oath is to protect the royal family from all threats, foreign and domestic. When Duchess Margot physically assaulted Princess Isabella, she became such a threat, regardless of her noble birth. Assault is a strong word, Captain. Many would argue that what happened was merely a family disagreement that got slightly out of hand. With respect, Your Majesty, I've seen enough violence in my military career to recognize assault when I see it. The Duchess deliberately used physical force to intimidate and humiliate the princess in front of hundreds of witnesses. If she had been a commoner, she would have been arrested immediately. Edmund nodded slowly. And the princess's curtsy? What's your assessment of that action? Marcus hesitated. This was dangerous ground, because his answer could be interpreted as either supporting or challenging royal prerogatives. The princess acted according to her conscience and her sense of justice. I believe she wanted to publicly demonstrate that honor and service deserve recognition, regardless of social status. That's a diplomatic answer, Captain. But, I'm asking for your honest opinion, not diplomatic courtesy. Marcus met the king's gaze directly. Your Majesty, Princess Isabella showed more courage and leadership in that ballroom than I've seen from many seasoned commanders. She defended someone who had risked his career to protect her, and she did so in a way that sent a clear message about the values she intends to uphold as future queen. If that's not worthy of support, then I don't understand what leadership means. The silence that followed stretched for nearly a full minute, during which Marcus wondered if he had just ended his career with excessive honesty. But, when King Edmund finally spoke, his voice carried a note of something that sounded like relief. Do you know why I chose to make my granddaughter the heir apparent instead of one of her male cousins? I assumed it was because she demonstrated the greatest aptitude for leadership, Your Majesty. Partly. But also because she possesses something that many of our nobility seem to have lost, a genuine sense of justice and compassion for all our subjects, not just those born to privilege. Edmund rose from his chair and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens. Last night, she proved that my faith in her was justified. And you, Captain, proved that the crown's faith in you has been equally justified. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him, but the king wasn't finished. However, Edmund continued, we now face a significant political challenge. Half the kingdom's nobility is demanding your dismissal, while the other half is calling for Duchess Margot's exile. Several foreign ambassadors are questioning our stability, and there are rumors that some noble houses are considering withdrawing their support from Isabella's eventual succession. The captain felt his stomach drop. Your Majesty, if my actions have compromised Princess Isabella's position, your actions, Captain, have forced us to confront issues that we should have addressed years ago. The question now is how we handle the consequences. Edmund returned to his desk and picked up a leather-bound document. I've been reviewing the legal precedents for situations like this. It's complicated by the fact that we have a member of the royal family committing assault against another member of the royal family, a commoner challenging a duchess in defense of royal protocol, and a princess publicly honoring someone far beneath her station. What do the precedents suggest, Your Majesty? That we're in completely uncharted territory, Edmund replied with a wry smile. There are no precedents for this situation because nothing like it has ever happened before. Which means we have the opportunity to set new precedents, if we're clever about it. The king set the document aside and fixed Marcus with an intense stare. I'm going to ask you to do something difficult, Captain. I want you to attend this afternoon's audience with Duchess Margot. Marcus blinked in surprise. Your Majesty? Margot is coming here expecting to receive an apology and see you dismissed in disgrace. Instead, she's going to find you standing at attention beside the throne, officially representing the crown's position on last night's events. And, what is the crown's position, Your Majesty? Edmund's smile was sharp as a blade. That assault upon a member of the royal family is treason, regardless of the perpetrator's bloodline, and that those who defend the crown deserve honor, regardless of their birth. The implications of the king's words sent a chill down Marcus's spine. Edmund wasn't just supporting his actions from the previous night, he was using them as the foundation for a fundamental shift in royal policy. Your Majesty, are you certain this is wise? The political ramifications of backing down would be far worse, Edmund interrupted. If we allow Duchess Margot's behavior to go unpunished, we send a message that royal blood is a license for any conduct, no matter how outrageous. If we dismiss you for doing your duty, we tell every loyal servant of the crown that their service means nothing when it conflicts with noble privilege. The king stood and began pacing behind his desk, his military bearing evident in the precision of his movements. But, more than that, Captain, we send a message about what kind of queen Princess Isabella will be. The nobility needs to understand that she will not be intimidated, that she will not allow injustice to flourish under her rule, and that she will reward loyalty and courage wherever she finds them. Marcus absorbed the king's words, understanding the magnitude of what was being proposed. This will change everything, Your Majesty. Yes, it will. The question is whether we have the courage to see it through. Before Marcus could respond, another knock sounded at the study door. This time, it was Lady Victoria Ashford, who entered with obvious nervousness but determined purpose. Your Majesty, she said with a curtsy, forgive the intrusion, but Princess Isabella has asked me to deliver a message. What message? Victoria straightened her shoulders, clearly preparing to deliver words that she had memorized carefully. The princess wants you to know that she stands completely behind her actions of last night, that she is prepared to face whatever consequences may result, and that she absolutely refuses to allow Captain Hartwell to be punished for protecting her. Edmund's eyebrows rose. Those are her exact words? Actually, Your Majesty, her exact words were considerably more colorful. I've taken the liberty of translating them into more diplomatic language. Despite the gravity of the situation, Marcus found himself suppressing a smile. Princess Isabella's spirit was clearly undiminished by the previous night's drama. Please tell the princess, Edmund said carefully, that her loyalty to those who serve her faithfully is noted and appreciated. And assure her that Captain Hartwell's position is secure. As Victoria curtsied and withdrew, the king turned back to Marcus. Are you prepared for what's coming, Captain? Because I should warn you, this afternoon's meeting with Duchess Margot is likely to be even more challenging than last night's confrontation. Marcus straightened to full attention. I serve at the pleasure of the crown, Your Majesty. If you believe my presence at that meeting will serve the kingdom's interests, then I will be honored to attend. Good. But there's one more thing. Edmund's expression grew serious. Duchess Margot will undoubtedly demand satisfaction for what she considers an insult to her honor. She may even challenge you to a formal duel. A duel? Marcus felt his blood chill. Dueling was technically legal among the nobility, but a duel between a duchess and a commoner would be unprecedented and politically explosive. It's unlikely to come to that, but if it does, I want you to know that the crown will support your right to decline such a challenge. A duchess cannot compel a commoner to risk his life simply because she feels insulted. And if I choose to accept such a challenge? Edmund's smile was grim. Then, I would advise you to remember that Duchess Margot was considered one of the finest swordswomen of her generation before she became more interested in political maneuvering than martial arts. The warning hung in the air like a sword over Marcus's head as he prepared for what might be the most dangerous afternoon of his long career. Outside the king's study, the palace continued its daily rhythms, but, beneath the surface, tension crackled like electricity before a storm. Servants whispered in corridors about the previous night's events, noble visitors huddled in urgent conferences, and even the usually unflappable palace cat seemed to sense that something momentous was building. In her private chambers, Princess Isabella sat at her writing desk, composing letters to various noble houses throughout the kingdom. Each letter was carefully crafted to explain her actions and outline her vision for the future, but the underlying message was consistent: the days of unchallenged noble privilege were ending, and a new era of earned respect was beginning. Meanwhile, in her temporary quarters in the palace's east wing, Duchess Margot was conducting her own correspondence, rallying supporters and planning her strategy for the afternoon's confrontation. She had not slept since the previous night's humiliation, and her anger had crystallized into cold determination to restore her honor and see Marcus Hartwell destroyed. As noon approached, the stage was set for a confrontation that would determine not just the fate of individual participants, but the future direction of the kingdom itself. And, at the center of it all stood a common-born soldier whose only crime had been doing his duty too well, preparing to face the consequences of defending a princess who had dared to challenge centuries of tradition. The afternoon audience would be unlike anything in royal history, and everyone involved understood that the outcome would echo through the halls of Astoria Palace for generations to come. Part for the throne room of Astoria Palace had witnessed many dramatic moments throughout its 400-year history, but the assembled crowd that gathered that gray afternoon seemed to sense they were about to witness something unprecedented. Word of the confrontation had spread throughout the palace and beyond, drawing nobility, court officials, and diplomatic observers who understood that the outcome of this meeting would have far-reaching consequences. Marcus stood at his assigned position to the right of the throne, his dress uniform immaculate despite the tension that coiled in his chest like a living thing. The ceremonial sword at his side felt heavier than usual, weighted with the symbolism of everything it represented. Around him, the throne room buzzed with hushed conversations and barely concealed anticipation. King Edmund entered with full royal ceremony, his crown catching the light from the great windows as he took his place on the ancient throne. Queen Catherine followed, her face a mask of royal composure that barely concealed her anxiety about the coming confrontation. Princess Isabella entered last, and Marcus felt a surge of pride at the sight of her. Despite her youth, she carried herself with the dignity of a seasoned monarch, her head held high and her expression serene. The herald's voice rang across the suddenly silent throne room: Her Grace, Duchess Margot Blackwood requests audience with His Majesty. The great doors swung open, and Duchess Margot entered with a procession that seemed designed for maximum intimidation. She wore black silk that rustled ominously with each step, and her famous sapphires caught the light like chips of ice. Behind her walked Lord Blackwood, her husband, along with 3 other nobles who had agreed to serve as her witnesses and supporters. But it was the presence of Sir Roderick Ashworth that caused the most stir among the assembled crowd. Sir Roderick was widely regarded as one of the finest swordsmen in the kingdom, a man whose skill with a blade was matched only by his rigid adherence to the old codes of honor and nobility. His presence sent an unmistakable message about the Duchess's intentions. Duchess Margot approached the throne with measured steps, her eyes never leaving King Edmund's face. When she reached the appropriate distance, she offered a curtsy that was technically correct but noticeably shallow, a subtle show of disrespect that didn't go unnoticed by anyone present. "Your Majesty," she began, her voice carrying clearly across the silent throne room, "I come before you seeking justice for the grave insults and injuries I suffered last night at the hands of your employee." The deliberate pause before employee was designed to emphasize Marcus's common birth and inferior social status. Several of the Duchess's supporters murmured agreement, while others in the crowd shifted uncomfortably at the obvious disrespect. King Edmund's voice remained perfectly level. "State your grievances clearly, Duchess. I was publicly humiliated, threatened with violence, and subjected to the insolent demands of a mere soldier who dared to lay his hand upon his sword in my presence." Margot's voice rose slightly as she warmed to her theme. Worse, this captain was then honored by Princess Isabella in a display that mocked centuries of royal tradition and noble privilege. She turned to gesture toward Marcus, her eyes blazing with cold fury. "I demand that this commoner be stripped of his rank, expelled from royal service, and made to answer for his crimes against my person and dignity." A ripple of tension passed through the throne room. Many of the assembled nobles nodded approvingly at the Duchess's demands, while others looked uncomfortable with her aggressive tone. King Edmund allowed the silence to stretch for several long moments before responding. "Captain Hartwell, you have heard the Duchess's accusations. How do you answer them?" Marcus stepped forward one precise pace, his military bearing evident in every movement. "Your Majesty, I acted in accordance with my sworn duty to protect the royal family from all threats, foreign and domestic. When Duchess Margot physically assaulted Princess Isabella, I intervened as required by my oath of service." "Assault?" Duchess Margot's voice cracked like a whip. "I did nothing more than attempt to provide guidance to an impudent child. You placed your hands upon Princess Isabella without her consent and used physical force to intimidate her," Marcus replied evenly. "By any reasonable definition, that constitutes assault." The accusation sent another wave of whispers through the crowd. The legal implications were clear to everyone present. If Marcus's characterization was accepted, then Duchess Margot had indeed committed treason by assaulting a member of the royal family. Furthermore, Marcus continued, "When you threatened to continue your aggressive behavior, I warned you of the consequences. At no time did I actually draw steel or offer violence. I simply made it clear that further assault upon Princess Isabella would not be tolerated." Duchess Margot's face had gone pale with fury, but before she could respond, Princess Isabella stepped forward. "If I may speak, Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and confident. Edmund nodded his permission, and Isabella turned to face the assembled crowd. "I was present throughout the events in question, and I can confirm that Captain Hartwell's account is accurate. My aunt did indeed use physical force against me, and Captain Hartwell's intervention was both necessary and appropriate." The princess's direct confirmation of the assault allegation caused a sensation among the gathered nobles. Several of Duchess Margot's supporters looked distinctly uncomfortable, while others began whispering urgently among themselves. Moreover, Isabella continued, "Captain Hartwell's conduct throughout the incident was exemplary. He showed restraint when provocation might have justified harsher action, he maintained proper respect for royal protocol even while defending me, and he demonstrated the kind of loyalty and courage that should be rewarded, not punished." It was a masterful political statement, one that publicly endorsed Marcus's actions while simultaneously challenging anyone who disagreed to question the princess's judgment and character. Duchess Margot, however, was far from finished. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled rage, "I refuse to accept the word of a child who has clearly been influenced by this soldier's manipulations. I demand trial by combat to settle this matter honorably." The challenge hit the throne room like a thunderbolt. Trial by combat was an ancient rite, one that hadn't been invoked in over 50 years, but it remained technically legal under kingdom law. The implications were staggering. A duchess was formally challenging a commoner to mortal combat, with the victor's position being deemed correct by divine judgment. King Edmund's face remained impassive, but Marcus could see the calculation behind his eyes. The king was undoubtedly considering the political ramifications of allowing or denying such a challenge. "Sir Roderick," Duchess Margot continued, "has agreed to serve as my champion in this matter." The announcement caused another stir among the crowd. Trial by combat typically required the principals to fight personally, but ancient law did allow for the use of champions in certain circumstances. By naming Sir Roderick, the Duchess was essentially guaranteeing that Marcus would face one of the kingdom's deadliest swordsmen. Marcus felt his mouth go dry, but his voice remained steady as he responded. "Your Majesty, if the Duchess insists upon trial by combat, I accept her challenge. However, as the accused party, I claim the right to fight personally rather than name a champion." It was a bold decision, one that surprised even Marcus himself. By refusing to name a champion, he was essentially volunteering to face Sir Roderick in single combat, a contest that most observers would consider tantamount to suicide. "Captain," King Edmund said carefully, "you understand that Sir Roderick is widely considered one of the finest swordsmen in the kingdom?" "I do, Your Majesty." "And you still choose to face him personally rather than name a champion?" "I do, Your Majesty. If my honor and service are to be judged, then I will defend them with my own sword, not hide behind another's skill." The response sent a murmur of approval through portions of the crowd. Whatever his chances against Sir Roderick, Marcus was demonstrating the kind of personal courage that even his opponents had to respect. Princess Isabella, however, was less impressed with his heroic gesture. Captain Hartwell, she said, her voice tight with concern, surely there are more experienced swordsmen who could serve as your champion? Marcus turned to meet her gaze, and she saw something in his eyes that made her understand his decision. This wasn't about winning or losing, it was about proving that common-born honor was worth defending with one's life. Your Royal Highness, he replied formally, some things cannot be delegated to others, no matter how skilled they might be. King Edmund rose from his throne, and the entire room fell silent. Very well, he said, his voice carrying the full weight of royal authority. Trial by combat is accepted. The contest will take place at dawn tomorrow in the palace courtyard, with the full court as witnesses. He paused, looking around the room to ensure he had everyone's attention. However, I want it clearly understood that this combat is being fought to settle questions of honor and truth, not to determine guilt or innocence of treason. Regardless of the outcome, the Crown's position on assault against the royal family remains unchanged. Such actions are treasonous regardless of the perpetrator's bloodline. It was a masterful political maneuver, one that allowed the combat to proceed while protecting the Crown's legal position. Even if Marcus lost, the precedent that royal blood didn't excuse assault would remain intact. Duchess Margot's face showed disappointment at the king's qualification, but she nodded stiffly. Very well, Your Majesty. At dawn tomorrow, truth will be revealed. As the formal audience concluded and the crowd began to disperse, Marcus found himself surrounded by well-wishers and supporters. Several younger nobles expressed their admiration for his courage, while veteran soldiers offered tactical advice for the coming duel. But it was Princess Isabella's whispered words that stayed with him as he prepared for what might be the last night of his life. Win or lose tomorrow, she had said, you've already proven that honor exists in this kingdom. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. As evening fell over Astoria Palace, two men prepared for a dawn appointment that would settle far more than questions of personal honor. In his chambers, Sir Roderick practiced forms and combinations with the methodical precision of a master craftsman, his blade singing through the air in patterns perfected over decades of study. In the guards' quarters, Marcus sat quietly at his small writing desk, composing letters to family members he might never see again. His sword lay across his knees, not the ornate ceremonial blade he wore at court, but the practical military sword that had served him through 23 years of faithful service. Outside, rain continued to fall against the palace windows, as if the kingdom itself were weeping for what tomorrow would bring. The trial by combat would determine more than just the fate of one soldier and one duchess. It would establish precedents about honor, justice, and the value of loyalty that would echo through Astoria's history for generations to come. And, at dawn, when steel met steel in the palace courtyard, everyone present would learn whether courage and righteousness could triumph over skill and privilege, or whether the old order would reassert its dominance through the ancient language of blood and blades. Part 5. Dawn broke gray and cold over Astoria Palace, painting the ancient stones in shades of silver and shadow. The palace courtyard, normally a place of quiet morning beauty, had been transformed into an arena of judgment where two men would settle questions that went to the very heart of the kingdom's social order. Marcus stood in the armoring chamber adjacent to the courtyard, methodically checking each piece of his battle gear. The mail hauberk felt familiar against his shoulders. He had worn similar armor during his military campaigns years ago, though those battles had been fought for king and country rather than personal honor. His sword, freshly sharpened and blessed by the palace chaplain, hung comfortably at his side. You don't have to do this, you know. Marcus turned to see Sir Geoffrey Pemberton, the king's nephew and one of the few nobles who had publicly supported his actions. Geoffrey was also an accomplished swordsman, and his offer to serve as champion had been both generous and sincere. Yes, I do, Marcus replied, adjusting his sword belt. Some battles can't be fought by proxy. Sir Roderick has killed 11 men in formal combat over the past 15 years. He's never been defeated in single combat, never even seriously wounded. Geoffrey's concern was evident in his voice. This isn't about courage, Marcus. It's about mathematics. Marcus smiled grimly. Then, I'll have to change the mathematics. Through the chamber's small window, he could see the crowd gathering in the courtyard. It seemed as though half the kingdom's nobility had come to witness the unprecedented trial by combat between a duchess's champion and a common-born guard. Foreign ambassadors occupied a special viewing area, no doubt preparing reports that would spread news of this day's events across the known world. At the courtyard's eastern end, Princess Isabella stood with her grandparents, her face pale but determined. She had fought unsuccessfully to prevent the combat, even offering to formally pardon any perceived insults if the Duchess would withdraw her challenge. Duchess Margot had refused, declaring that only blood could wash away the stain on her honor. A herald's trumpet sounded, signaling the beginning of the formal proceedings. Marcus took a deep breath, offered a silent prayer to whatever gods watched over foolish soldiers, and stepped into the morning light. The courtyard fell silent as he emerged, his mail glinting dully in the pale sunlight. Across the combat area, Sir Roderick waited in full plate armor that bore the intricate engravings of a master craftsman. The knight's helmet was tucked under his arm, revealing a face that might have been carved from granite, stern, confident, and utterly without mercy. King Edmund stood on the royal balcony overlooking the courtyard, his voice carrying clearly in the still morning air. "We are gathered here to witness trial by combat, an ancient rite invoked to settle questions of honor between Duchess Margot Blackwood and Captain Marcus Hartwell of the Royal Guard." The formal words echoed off the courtyard walls, witnessed by hundreds of nobles, diplomats, and palace staff who had gathered to see this historic confrontation. Sir Roderick Ashworth stands as champion for the Duchess, while Captain Hartwell fights for himself. Let it be known that this combat is fought under the ancient laws of our kingdom, with victory determining the truth of the matter in dispute. Marcus walked to the center of the courtyard, where a circle had been marked in white chalk. Sir Roderick approached from the opposite side, his movements fluid despite the weight of his armor. The two men faced each other across 6 feet of packed earth that would soon be stained with blood. "Sir Roderick," the herald called, "state your cause." The knight's voice carried the authority of nobility and the confidence of superior skill. "I fight to defend the honor of Duchess Margot Blackwood, who was gravely insulted and threatened by this commoner. I fight to uphold the natural order that has made our kingdom great, and to punish the insolence that would place common birth on equal footing with noble blood." "Captain Hartwell," the herald continued, "state your cause." Marcus drew his sword, the steel singing as it cleared the scabbard. "I fight to defend my actions in protecting Princess Isabella from assault. I fight for the principle that royal blood deserves protection regardless of who threatens it. And I fight for the truth that honor comes from deeds, not bloodlines." The words hung in the morning air like a battle standard, defining not just this combat but the larger conflict between old traditions and new principles. "Let combat commence," King Edmund declared. Sir Roderick immediately drew his sword and took a defensive stance, his blade held in a perfect guard position that spoke of decades of training. His armor was magnificent articulated plate that would turn aside most blows while allowing full freedom of movement. Against such protection, Marcus would need to find gaps or rely on the crushing force of his blade to damage what lay beneath. Marcus circled slowly, studying his opponent's stance and looking for weaknesses. Sir Roderick was undoubtedly the superior swordsman, but Marcus had advantages of his own: years of battlefield experience, the desperation of a man fighting for his life, and the knowledge that he represented something larger than himself. The first exchange came suddenly. Sir Roderick feinted high, then cut low, his blade whistling toward Marcus's leg with killing speed. The captain barely managed to deflect the strike, the impact sending vibrations up his arm. Before he could recover fully, Sir Roderick was already launching his next attack, a thrust toward the chest that Marcus avoided only by throwing himself sideways. The crowd gasped as Marcus rolled away from the knight's follow-up strike, coming to his feet just in time to parry a cut that would have split his skull. It was immediately clear that Sir Roderick possessed not just superior skill, but superior speed as well. For the next several minutes, Marcus found himself fighting a purely defensive battle, giving ground steadily as Sir Roderick pressed his advantage with methodical precision. The knight's attacks came in perfectly timed combinations, each strike flowing seamlessly into the next, forcing Marcus to react rather than initiate. Blood appeared on Marcus's left arm where a thrust had found a gap in his mail. Then, his right thigh took a glancing cut that would have been crippling if the angle had been slightly different. With each exchange, it became more apparent that this was not a contest between equals. Princess Isabella watched in growing horror as her protector was systematically dismantled by the superior swordsman. Twice she started forward as if to stop the combat, only to be restrained by her grandfather's firm hand on her arm. But Marcus was not finished yet. As Sir Roderick pressed forward with another combination attack, Marcus suddenly changed tactics. Instead of giving ground, he stepped inside the knight's reach, accepting a pommel strike to his ribs in order to grapple with his opponent. For a moment, the two men struggled in close quarters, strength against strength rather than skill against skill. Marcus was the stronger man, his years of military training having built muscle and endurance that courtly swordplay could not match. He managed to drive Sir Roderick backward, breaking the knight's rhythm and forcing him out of his preferred fighting distance. But the advantage was temporary. Sir Roderick broke free with a vicious knee strike that doubled Marcus over, then followed with a pommel blow to the back of the head that sent the captain sprawling face-first into the dirt. The crowd fell silent, many apparently believing the combat was over. Sir Roderick raised his sword for what appeared to be the finishing stroke, aiming for the gap between Marcus's helmet and mail coif where a thrust would sever the spine instantly. Marcus rolled desperately to one side, the knight's blade striking sparks from the stone where his head had been a moment before. Somehow, he managed to get his feet under him and his sword up in time to block the next strike, though the force of it drove him to one knee. "Yield," Sir Roderick said quietly, his voice carrying just far enough for Marcus to hear. "You fought bravely, but this ends only one way. Yield with honor, and perhaps the Duchess will show mercy." Marcus looked up at his opponent through the bars of his helmet, breathing heavily but with unbroken determination in his eyes. A guard of the royal family doesn't yield to anyone who threatens those he's sworn to protect. Sir Roderick nodded with what might have been respect, then raised his sword again. What happened next would be debated in sword schools and military academies for decades to come. Instead of trying to rise or back away, Marcus suddenly lunged forward from his kneeling position, driving his shoulder into Sir Roderick's midsection with all his remaining strength. The unexpected tactic caught the knight completely off guard, sending both men tumbling to the ground in a tangle of armor and blades. They rolled across the chalk circle, each trying to gain advantage over the other. Sir Roderick's superior armor protected him, but it also limited his mobility in ground fighting. Marcus, with his lighter mail and desperate strength, managed to pin the knight's sword arm long enough to deliver several punishing blows to his opponent's helmet. The crowd was on its feet now, shouting and cheering as the two warriors grappled in the dirt like common brawlers rather than noble champions. This was no longer elegant swordplay, it was a brutal struggle for survival that would be won by strength, endurance, and sheer will to live. Sir Roderick managed to free his arm and struck Marcus across the face with his gauntlet fist, opening a cut above the captain's eye that immediately began streaming blood. But Marcus responded by grabbing the knight's helmet and slamming it repeatedly against the stone courtyard until Sir Roderick's struggles began to weaken. Both men struggled to their feet, swaying with exhaustion and injury. Sir Roderick's perfect armor was now dented and scraped, while Marcus's mail hung in tatters from several cuts. Blood streamed from wounds on both fighters, staining the white chalk circle crimson. They faced each other across 3 feet of blood-soaked earth, both understanding that the next exchange would likely be the last. Sir Roderick raised his sword with obvious effort, while Marcus shifted his grip on his own blade, preparing for one final assault. The knight attacked first, launching a series of cuts that were still technically perfect but noticeably slower than his earlier combinations. Marcus deflected 2 strikes, took a third on his shoulder that sent fresh blood flowing down his arm, then launched his own counterattack. His blade caught Sir Roderick in the side where a gap had opened between breastplate and armguard. The steel bit deep, and the knight staggered backward with a grunt of pain. But, even wounded, Sir Roderick was dangerous. His return strike caught Marcus across the chest, parting mail rings and opening a long cut from shoulder to ribs. Both men stood swaying, each waiting for the other to fall. The crowd had fallen silent again, watching 2 warriors who had given everything they had in service to their causes. Then, Sir Roderick's knees buckled. The knight fell forward onto his hands, blood streaming from the wound in his side. His sword fell from nerveless fingers to clatter on the stone. For a moment, he tried to rise again, but his strength was gone. Marcus stood over his fallen opponent, his own sword raised for the killing stroke that would end the combat decisively. The crowd held its breath, waiting to see if the common-born guard would claim the life of a noble knight. Instead, Marcus stepped back and lowered his blade. "Sir Roderick fought with honor," he called out, his voice carrying clearly despite his exhaustion. "I claim victory, but I will not take the life of a worthy opponent who served his cause faithfully." The gesture sent a wave of approval through portions of the crowd. Even some of Duchess Margot's supporters seemed moved by the captain's merciful treatment of their champion. King Edmund's voice rang across the courtyard, "Captain Marcus Hartwell is victorious in trial by combat. Let it be recorded that his actions in defending Princess Isabella were justified and honorable, and that his service to the crown is beyond reproach." But the king wasn't finished. Furthermore, let it be known that assault upon any member of the royal family, regardless of the perpetrator's bloodline, will be considered treason and punished accordingly. Noble birth grants many privileges, but immunity from the consequences of violence is not among them. The declaration sent shockwaves through the assembled nobility. Edmund had used Marcus's victory as justification for formally establishing new legal precedents that would fundamentally alter the relationship between commoners and nobles. As palace physicians rushed to attend to both fighters, Marcus found himself surrounded by congratulating supporters. But his eyes sought out Princess Isabella, who was pushing through the crowd with tears streaming down her face. "You magnificent fool," she said as she reached him, her voice a mixture of relief, admiration, and exasperation. "You could have been killed." "It would have been a good death, Your Highness," Marcus replied, swaying slightly as exhaustion and blood loss began to take their toll. "No death in my service would be good," Isabella replied fiercely. "Promise me you'll never risk yourself so recklessly again." Marcus managed a tired smile. "I promise to be more careful, Your Highness. But I make no promises about recklessness when your safety is at stake." As physicians helped him toward the palace infirmary, Marcus could see Duchess Margot near the courtyard's exit, her face a mask of rage and humiliation. She had gambled everything on this trial by combat and lost decisively, not just the contest but her political standing and social influence. The defeat would effectively end her ability to challenge Isabella's position or question the princess's judgment. More importantly, it would serve as a warning to other nobles who might consider similar challenges to the changing order. In the days that followed, word of the trial by combat spread throughout the kingdom and beyond. Foreign courts heard tales of a common-born guard who had defeated a noble knight in defense of his princess, and of a royal family that publicly honored courage over bloodline. Some praised the new precedents as long-overdue reforms that would create a more just society. Others condemned them as dangerous challenges to the natural order that would lead to chaos and rebellion. But everyone agreed that something fundamental had changed in Astoria, and that the ripples of that change would be felt for generations. Marcus recovered from his wounds and returned to his duties, but his role had fundamentally changed. No longer just a guard, he had become a symbol of the new order that Princess Isabella represented, proof that honor, courage, and loyalty could elevate even the humblest origins. Princess Isabella herself emerged from the crisis as a leader in her own right, having demonstrated that she would neither be intimidated by noble bullies nor abandon those who served her faithfully. The nobility began to understand that she would rule with both compassion and steel, rewarding virtue while punishing abuse regardless of its source. And, in the quiet moments of palace life, when ceremony gave way to simple human interaction, a common-born soldier and a future queen continued to demonstrate that the best of both worlds could be found in mutual respect, shared values, and the understanding that true nobility came not from bloodline, but from the choices one made in service to others. The kingdom of Astoria had been forever changed by one evening's confrontation and one morning's trial by combat, and its people would remember for generations the day when a guard's courage and a princess's wisdom proved that honor belonged to those brave enough to defend it, regardless of the circumstances of their birth. In the royal chronicles, historians would record these events as the beginning of a new era, when merit began to matter as much as heritage, when justice became more important than privilege, and when a young princess showed her people what true leadership looked like by standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. And Captain Marcus Hartwell, the common-born soldier whose simple act of protection had sparked a revolution in royal thinking, would be remembered not as the man who defeated a knight in single combat, but as the guardian who proved that loyalty, courage, and honor were the true measures of nobility in any age.